two Buddhist monks who are walking along a path, and it's in the tradition where the male monks were not meant to touch females.
Right.
And then there's a woman who needs to, for some reason, cross like a puddle or something like this. And so one of the monks, picks up the woman and helps her get across, and puts her down, and they carry on. And then about an hour later, the monk, the one that didn't help, turned to the other monk and said, why did you help that? You've broken our rules. This is really, it's, something, you've done something that you shouldn't have done. And the other monk turned to him and just said, oh, okay, that's interesting. I let that woman go an hour ago, and you're still carrying her.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Going Out Looking In, the podcast about the big questions of life, personal growth, and spirituality. My name is Maxi, I'm your host, and today we're exploring the world of somatics. To be more exact and detailed, somatic experiencing, Rolfing, and much more. This is a very special episode, not only because of the topic, but also because of the person I'm speaking with, who is Tamsin Rickeard. I reached out to Tamsin after traveling to the UK and then afterwards to the US, and I was looking for people and individuals who combine the world of somatics with the world of manual therapy, e.g. Rolfing or physiotherapy. And with Tamsin, I then found such an individual, and I was truly amazed by just reading her resume and her background, and to then obviously have that conversation. So, to give a little bit of context around what Tamsin is doing, she is a somatic experiencing practitioner, so SE practitioner, which as some of you know, was created by Peter Levine, and it is a bottom-up approach which helps people with trauma release. And I'm getting to that in a second. She's also a certified Rolfer. So Rolfer, for all of you beautiful people, or Rolfing, is a bodywork and movement modality founded by Ida Rolf in the 1970s. And it's also relying a lot on manual therapy that the practitioner applies on the patient. And with all of that combined knowledge, Tamsin basically seamlessly pulls whatever she needs in sessions with her clients and helps them to, in a safe way, release traumatic and stuck energies that are stored within the patient's system. And while I know and I want to really do my best to keep those intros a little bit shorter and not like blabber on for too long, this intro in particular will be a little bit different because Tamsin and I, after the conversation, found out that we haven't really explicitly addressed the topic of trauma. And because we throw around with this word all the time, and actually not only in this podcast, but I have the feeling everybody is talking about trauma without having both feet on the ground and actually defining the term, I want to do so, and Tamsin did a great job in outlining and explaining that term a little bit in the context that we use it in. So I am going to do that right now before entering this conversation. All right. So what does that mean? What is trauma? So trauma is not in the event. Trauma is in the body. As you know, we share a nervous system in common with all other animals, which is fully capable of restoring equilibrium after a threat has passed. But we find that in humans, the self-regulating function can be blocked or disturbed, after which trauma symptoms can occur. So although humans possess, in theory, regulatory mechanism virtually identical to those in animals, these systems are often overridden by neocortical inhibition. That means through the rational mind. As common examples, we may have been brought up to believe that big girls or big boys don't cry, or we may have been banished if we misbehaved, and this will override the natural required discharges brought about by crying or normally connecting. So this internal restraint can lead to the formation of a constellation of symptoms, including pain, patterns of bracing and collapse, cognitive dysfunction, anxiety, or a sense of pervasive threat. Now we have to also, or I have to talk about the ANS, that's the automatic nervous system, which regulates all the basic functions of our bodies, including our visceral system, meaning the internal organs. And the ANS operates automatically without our control, and it is also the source of our survival responses. So a healthy nervous system is able to respond to different levels of threat, and it will mobilize a defensive strategy of any of the fight, flight, or freeze responses that you may have heard of as appropriate. So if threat responses are successfully completed and danger has passed, the system will begin its function of naturally dissipating the arousal, and the body can finally come back to rest. You may also have seen some videos or read about the theories of Peter Levine when he talks about animals. They can literally shake their physical body and therefore let go of the stress that any threat or event caused. So, meaning if a defensive strategy is thwarted, so for example, you ran but you were caught, or unavailable, so you were too small to fight back, the charge within the system, like I said, is blocked from releasing. So when this happens, the impact on the person can be physical, emotional, psychological, and or spiritual. So one person response to an event can be very different to another person's for a variety of reasons, including prior history of trauma, their health at the time of the event, resilience of the individual, and other causes or reasons. So often people think of traumatizing incidents as being the large events, right, that we can point out, such as a car crash, an operation, an attack, or what have you. We can think of these events as big T traumas, okay? But in today's world, we have 100 little t traumas. For example, bullying at school, or the need to be constantly on and available, shocking world events, smartphone notifications, unaware parenting techniques, to just name a few here. So both big T traumas and little t traumas can impact the person in similar ways, and we will often talk of a traumatized system being one that experienced too much, too fast, too soon. All right, too much, too fast, too soon. I think that's actually really a good way of putting it. So for example, a car crash or an attack, but we can also become traumatized by too little for too long. Also very good. As an inattentive or abusive home life for a child, for example. So the large majority of people worldwide will have traumatic experiences in their lifetime, which can have major impact on their health and well-being. So current rates, which is actually, that's crazy, of trauma exposures are estimated to be anywhere from 60 to 100% in the general population. So by attending to the body's own inherent capacity to self-regulate, we can heal our traumatic symptoms, come back into presence and the natural flow of life. All right, that's a mouthful when it comes to trauma, but both Tamsin and I believe that it was important to lay the foundation for this conversation around what trauma actually is. I hope that it was informative, and now I keep finally shutting up and let you hear the wisdom that Tamsin has to share with us. So with that being said, much love from my heart to yours and beautiful insights with this episode, and Tamsin Rickeard. Tamsin, who are you?
Oh gosh, that's one of those questions that can be very short. I am me, I am who I am, or it can be incredibly long-winded. So yeah, it's difficult, I suppose. There are the immediate labels that pop up. I'm a woman living in London, I'm a mum, I'm a therapist, I'm a friend, I'm a nature lover, all of these things which are absolutely essential. I suppose in terms of this conversation, then I suppose what's most relevant is that I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner, I'm a Rolfer, I'm a very spiritual person. I've lived my journey and have arrived where I am now through all sorts of kind of unexpected twists and turns, if you like. So who am I? I think I'm now getting to a place where I think the most simple thing is I am who I am. And whatever that transpires to be from one moment to another moment, if that makes sense. So I try to not be so caught up with the identifying labels, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah, it does. You mentioned the word spiritual in there as well. And so maybe I would ask you, considering that background, considering that, how would you answer that question from that point of view?
Say more.
Basically, from a spiritual standpoint, if I would ask you who you are, what comes up there?
I think that's the simple I am who I am.
Right.
I'm the me living in this moment with this body, having a lived experience. Hopefully, with as much grace as possible. And I suppose with that sort of sense of being part of something that is other than me.
Beautiful.
It sounds sort of vaguely sort of esoteric and woo-woo enough for you. But I think, it is, it's the spirit having a lived experience.
Yeah, it does, isn't it? We're all dancing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So you mentioned some twists. Um, you mentioned some unexpected twists and some crossroads and things that led you to where you are today in a worldly sense. And I can very much identify with that. I mean, looking back at my 20s, now I'm at the end of my 20s, about to embark on a journey in my 30s, and I already see a zigzag. I already see major major twists and turns. So I'm curious, what, and you highlight whatever you want to highlight, and you pick out whatever you want to pick out. What are some of those twists and turns that led you to where you are today?
Um, it's sort of, where do you start? Where do you go back to? It feels like there's lots of things which um, we think of life as being quite linear. And then there's also, as I reflect back on that, it's like, and I took a path, and I'll share how I got to where I am now. But then you kind of realize, and there's an arc back to this, and there's another arc back to this, which don't seem as if they're in any way sort of directly linked. And yet, yes, I suppose in some ways it's sort of like I'm going on this trajectory and it's enabling me to come back to who I probably was. So in terms of, how I got to where I am now, I suppose the most kind of logical response to that, I was in my 30s, I was ending a relationship, and that was tricky, and I went into therapy. I was hoping that my partner then would join. We didn't. And that became a doorway of exploring then psychotherapy. And then I stayed with that, the relationship finished. And then there was a really, several years of exploration. And, and then there would be pauses, and then there would be another exploration. And I found that an incredibly helpful process. And I'd always had an interest in psychology when I was young. So there was the intellectual curiosity, and there was, the lived experience of this being something that I found very helpful. And it was a real sort of unpacking of, history, how I'd got to where I was, and, and of course why I was sort of experiencing, my lived reality, what was going on for me at that point in time. What were my filters, what were my beliefs, what were my patterns, etc. And so eventually I was sort of like, okay, so let's see if I, very sheepishly, okay, do you think that I might be able to do this one day? Can I sit in your chair? And, I was, encouraged to explore that. And I think so when that door opened for me, I then sort of bounced around and explored many other sort of modalities, if you like, and stumbled across somatic experiencing, actually through a Rolfer. And, and to backtrack there, I used to have kind of like a monthly deep tissue massage with somebody who then went on to train in this thing called Rolfing. And I was just very curious about her description of it. And so I was like, okay, well, I can't wait the 3 years before you're going to be qualified. I want to do it now, which is very much my personality as well. I want to find the answer now. And so I then went off to, she very kindly recommended 3 names, and I sort of checked them out. And I then chose somebody who was a Rolfer, And he also did this thing called Somatic Experiencing, worked with trauma. And I'm sort of, amused by the way that it was almost like my body took me there. Because I had no real understanding what trauma was. I had this, big T trauma of it being an event. And I didn't think that, nothing to do with my history. And then as we went through the Rolfing process, we came to points where actually SE became a necessary part of that. And also the awareness that a lot of my stuff actually was, I do have a trauma history like we all do. It was amusing that I hadn't kind of allowed myself, the openness to kind of consider that part of my story. So there was a big learning and an opening to that, and a kind of, a developing self-compassion and a really sort of remarkable journey with SE of, if you like, it was what for me helped the understanding that I had developed through the psychotherapeutic process to actually embed. So it's what, for me, it's what sort of made the understanding then become a lived experience. So that I went from understanding why I was reacting in a particular way to then having that freedom through doing the somatic experiencing work to actually stop, to change the way that I was reacting and moving from that space of reaction to responding.
Mm-hmm.
So, so I loved this modality and I wanted to then go off and train in that. And, and I was very curious about the Rolfing process as well, but I had in my mind that I wanted to do psychotherapy and somatic experiencing. So I started that journey I started to train as a Gestalt psychotherapist. I just did the first year. But what kept going on in my mind was kind of, but what about the Rolfing? What about the Rolfing? What about the Rolfing? And I actually ended up having to go through a process of, if you like, because it always, so in my mind, there was this hierarchy with psychotherapy at the top and body work at the bottom. What is considered proper therapy? Because I'm very much, my history is very much in the mind, in the intellect. And so I had this sort of like little internal struggle. And eventually I went, what's best for me? And I decided that the more body-focused training was what was best for my process. So that is how I ended up making that choice.
What contributed to that decision?
I think partly it's that realization that, I have been very sort of intellectual led. My intellect was my safe place, if that makes sense. It had kept me safe at a variety points in my life. It had facilitated, a quality of life in terms of a sort of monetary, level of comfort. Because I was working in business. I sort of worked as a finance director in smaller companies. And so that's my background. It's a very sort of intellectual. And yet where I found, I suppose, the most profound healing for me at that point in time was by becoming more embodied. So it was that sort of realization that, I got this, if you like, the sort of like the more intellectual bent. And what I want to develop is this more sort of body centered, and inevitably kind of heart centered, intuition centered skill base.
Right.
So rather than letting the intellect be the one that's sort of in charge.
Yeah. When I'm looking at the demographic of this podcast, it's mainly Western people listening to this. So, we're up in our heads a lot, and the cognitive aspect of life is big. This is how
Yeah,
society works, and a lot of you know things in our life benefit from us being in the mind to some degree.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So I would be curious to hear your personal, with all the experiences you have now. What Because I hear that word thrown around a lot,
Yeah.
which is embodiment. So
Yeah.
what does that
Absolutely.
actually mean to you? Yeah.
Um, Often it's as simple as just the witnessing of what is happening internally. And so if you like my experience of that, what does it feel like? When I slow down and I pay attention, I put my feet on the ground, I feel my sitting bones in the chair. It really is as if I can feel energetically there's a drop. With that comes a slowing down.
Hmm.
And, and it's whatever the weather is, I'm kind of noticing that I'm having a sort of, it's like there's an intention to say peace or something like that. But that's not always the case. It might be rage, it might be, there might be anxiety, there might be excitement, whatever it is. But it's that capacity of just sort of noticing what it is and being okay with that. Um, and it also extends then to, how, quite literally, how I move in life.
Hmm.
How do I walk? How do I swim? How do I stand in a room?
Can you give an example of what that would look like?
So, well, I suppose so through the Rolfing practice, we learn a particular, set of techniques which enables the body to be more open. And whatever that looks like for an individual is, change by, case by case. But there's a sort of freedom of movement that comes. And so, for example, the ability of the hips to move as one girdle and the shoulder girdle to move. And, when we're walking, are we walking in a way that's anatomically most efficient? So I'll be
Hmm.
walking, I'll literally be paying attention to that. What's happening? What's happening if I just allow my shoulders to swing? Which they're perfectly capable of doing, but quite often, like most people, I kind of start shifting up a little bit like that. There's a little bit of bracing going on because maybe I'm in a rush. I've got to do some emails, there might be something more serious, whatever it is, but it can be tiny little things. And so it can be as obvious as, okay, now walk from there. Does that make sense? What's happening with my toe hinge as I'm walking? Where am I walking from my sternum and my back? So there can be these little micro observations.
Right.
When I'm swimming, how can I swim in such a way that I'm reaching to my full extent, and then I'm sort of I'm allowing we use imagination quite a lot. So I can just do this, or I can kind of reach. I can gently reach. Where do the tip of my fingers go? And it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference to the quality of each stroke. So I suppose that then becomes a movement practice, which is very embodied. So that's how I kind of take it out into the world, if you like. How do
Right.
I?
Is there like so I feel that very much, and just by, I feel like participating in workshops and retreats, I did a lot of acting. So with acting, there's a lot of getting into the body. There's a lot of that happening. So I have my very own, by now, ever evolving practice of like conscious awareness of dropping into the body. And I feel like that it's absolutely essential to, and like I'm getting at a question that I want to ask you, which is basically, is there something that you recommend you use yourself as a sort of like a reminder? Because I feel like a lot of it has to do with this awareness of this like awareness of like, I am in my head right now, and it would be good to drop into the body. And I feel like because many people intellectually have heard of the term embodiment, and that it might be a good thing to be embodied and to be living more from a place of embodiment and grounded and all of that. But they literally forget about it throughout the day. I have the feeling they're so unconscious in their behavior that they simply forget to be present enough to drop into the body. So that's where my question is going. Like, is there specific practices that you use to basically facilitate that awareness?
Yeah, I mean, wherever we are, any moment when we can feel that sort of, and there's the energetics, isn't there, of a kind of busy mind. And I think as long as if we catch that, and often it's quite hard to catch it because we're busy doing this.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so it can be a practice of, firstly, it's the noticing, obviously. And it's also just then a moment of, so for example, in SE, we always, we'll just orient really slowly to the room. And I'm just looking, so I'm in my kitchen, I'm just, casually observing what's ahead of me. But even just doing that slight arc, so we would kind of continue slowly, but I can feel my nervous system responding to that. So I can feel it calming down, I can feel it settling. And that's something that when I'm with clients, it's something that we'll do usually together. You come in, there's always that sort of transition piece from there's life,
Yeah.
and now there's here. Let's spend, 30 seconds doing this and noticing if we can feel that dropping. Then there's many things like you did, feeling your feet. I'm sitting in a chair, so I'm on a bar stool, so my feet aren't in touch with the ground. So I'm sort of more aware of my sitting bones, the contact that they're making with the chair. So I'm sort of paying attention to that. But, it can be anything from, so often noticing our boundary and where it is, where's the contact point, is often a very useful. So if I'm sitting in a chair with arms, feel that my arms are dropping onto the chair. I might notice the texture of the fabric of the chair. And just doing that, the sort of like the haptic response just brings us down immediately. So those are sort of, like the in the moment things. But, I have a meditation practice, I have a movement practice, I do all of those things which help train that. And my meditation practice tends to be more body focused.
Right.
Rather than noticing the mind, I tend to notice the body. Yeah. And that's my sort of what I find more effective.
So, when speaking from a place of really sort of like I don't know if it's science. Speaking from a point of like knowledge and things that you have learned from working within somatic experiencing or Rolfing or whatever other modality, basically, if you had to put in words, because I find myself in that situation sometimes with people who are not in touch, in literal touch with these modalities. So I have to come up with words to sometimes elaborate on the benefits of doing that. All right. So basically, it's like, all right, so you're talking about, so it's very individual, as we've discussed. So for me, it is a mix of all sorts of different things in the morning. Like I'll just be doing shaking a lot. So really shaking my body. I feel like this is the most effective way for me to literally within 5 to 10 seconds get a whole different feel of the body. And when I do it for like 2 minutes, it's unbelievable. Like I'm sort of like really, yeah, I'm really in the body. And then I have other things like qigong, I think very powerful. But that's not where I really want to go. I just wanted to highlight it's very individual of like how you get there, and I'll be telling people about it, and they'll be like, okay, so and why exactly should I do that? And I'm just like, yeah, you drop in the body, and that feels good, and you're not in the mind, and they'll be like, yeah, but why? So I'm reaching a point of like I have to explain something. I have to give them something. So I'm like, okay, and I'm not a trained practitioner, so I'm just curious to hear from you. Like, is there like what can we say about why that is helpful, especially for us Westerners who are constantly basically living in the mind?
Well, I'm going to take it to the nervous system, so the autonomic nervous system. Parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous systems, which I'm sure you've heard of,
Yeah.
fight, flight, freeze. And So, for example, the sort of like the slowly noticing our space. What's happening then is we're literally checking for danger. This is an orienting response. So there's a threat, we automatically will orient. You hear a sound, turn. And then we decide, is that something that I need to do anything? Do I need to activate my next defensive mechanism, defensive response? So physiologically, there is a response to us checking out that there isn't a danger. So within us, what's actually happening is that the autonomic nervous system is enabling itself to just to come to another level of homeostasis, to just to drop down, to drop more into it'll be more into a parasympathetic state, where there will be less. So we talk about arousal of the nervous system, and there will just be less of that arousal, and that feels more peaceful, it feels more calm, it feels more expansive. And so doing that sort of repeatedly, sort of in training ourselves, if you like, to notice that, is at the core of then being able to bring our nervous system into a greater level of harmony, of sort of moving back into this natural wave state, which is happening at a cellular level. It's happening in life, all the way. There's always this, there's ups and downs in life, and how can we meet those? And with this sort of capacity to drop down into the body, to notice what's happening, we're then more able to start tolerating what's happening. Because often we're in our mind because what's going on in here is a little bit uncomfortable. I feel anxious. And anxiety has a sensation. It's usually around this part of the body. It's quite jittery. And we label it anxiety. It's actually it's also very similar to a sense of excitement, but it's how we label it that changes. But if there's a sensation that is in some way uncomfortable, we'll usually go to our mind. So we'll go to our mind, we'll pick up our phone, we'll watch telly, we'll go to our ego, we'll start being arrogant, or wanting to be right. Those sorts of things that we do to make us feel better about ourselves at this level, but it's cut off from what's going on at this level. And if we are able to effectively sort of tolerate a greater level of charge in our system, whether that be labeled positive or labeled negative, then our capacity to be in life, with these waves just expands to be able to tolerate, to contain a greater range of lived experiences. What that means is that when I'm faced with something challenging, maybe several years ago, I would have reacted in a way that didn't really serve me. And now I'm able to have the same thing happen. And, even, so let's talk about triggers. I might be triggered by it, but I'll be triggered to a much lower extent, or I just won't be triggered by it at all. So that's what happens over time as our nervous system develops this greater sense of capacity to hold a level of charge, if you like, of this arousal. And so these simple practices every day are sort of in training us to do that. That doesn't mean you have to go through a process with someone who can facilitate so with somatic experiencing, we're helping people to go through that process of, can you tolerate a little bit more charge in your system before you go away. Yeah? and the way that that is experienced by them is a greater capacity to hold discomfort. It's a noticing when the discomfort changes, and as it sort of changes, as we're bringing that sort of conscious awareness to the change, that's what enables the nervous system to just tolerate a little bit more, so it doesn't go into overwhelm so easily. And the way in the West that overwhelm shows up is quite often these sort of addictive behaviors like social media, shopping, comparison, the things that we know are happening in our way of living now.
Yeah, very, very interesting. That's very, very interesting. And there's a lot coming up for me when you're sharing this, particularly with the threshold, basically, of what we can tolerate within the system. Because I feel like, personally, a huge evolution with that, and a requirement for sensitivity when it comes to working with people or introducing them to this world. Because, and we will go there with this conversation, I'm sure, when it comes to trauma and, the different, all the shades of gray within this world, between the black and white, of very big ones, very maybe subtler ones, but and so I feel like there is a definitely like a need to distinct and to differentiate and to take into account the individual's journey and ability to handle all of these things. Because in theory, I'm getting that, or I understand that there is, so from a perspective, like a neuro scientific perspective, there are benefits to, for example, as we've now discussed, drop in more into the body and regulate the nervous system by bringing awareness to these bodily sensations. All right. So that's the theory. And then it's actually happening. And I feel, and I have not been the facilitator of those containers, but I've been participating in containers where obviously the same stimulus for a group will result in so many different reactions of people to this stimulus. And it just shows that, it requires a great sort of, knowledge and sensitivity towards, the threshold of one's ability to handle those emotions that are coming up. And I mean, wow, I just I also, I guess, with this podcast, it's maybe also somewhat of a responsibility with like sharing this to highlight that, because I experience this more and more with working online, facilitating a container online. To me, there is always like sort of a certain point where things getting quite dangerous, or I don't know, dangerous if that's the right adjective that I want to use, but like delicate when, going to places within, in this realm, and you're not able to, as a facilitator, or you're not fully able to intervene or, do any sort of like, participation in the process of any individual, because all you can do is talk, right? That's all the tools you have in that moment is your voice, that is being transmitted through this, as my friend always says, false cabastone. And so, I feel like this is like something that I really wanna highlight here. What I feel is like, wow, yeah, we talk about, we talk about deep stuff here. This is deep work, and it requires, knowledge on the side of the facilitator, and sensitivity, and humility as well, towards the processes of the participants. So I don't know. I guess I would just like maybe to explore that a little bit, just like open up maybe the stage here for, I don't know, for you to speak on that, if you feel like it, or if there's something that you want to contribute there.
Well, I think the key word is safety.
Right.
And so if we're touching into a traumatized system, then the first thing you do is to help to set the conditions so that safety is experienced. And that can be, so where are you doing it? How are you setting up the space? Having a certain level of experience and understanding that you can share with the client. So quite often a bit of psychoeducation really helps, because it helps to calm the mind. So why are we doing this? What's going on? What are the benefits? Why is this person asking me to look around the room? Yeah. It's giving a lot of space. It's really taking it slowly to start off with. And, like you say, I think the key word, absolutely, humility is a really important part of this.
Mm-hmm.
And each person's journey is uniquely theirs. Each person's capacity is uniquely theirs. And so it's the gently allowing stuff to unfold. What is presenting right now. But I think also what's key when you're working with trauma is we don't dive into the middle of it. We're not, and that's something that I make very clear. I'll have a little chat with someone before we start working, before we even meet, for them to get a sense of, okay, what is this person? And if they want to do a Zoom call so they can see me, that's absolutely fine, because I think that's really important. Just like, don't turn up here unless there is a part of you that feels that there's going to be some safety there. And of course there will be some level of fear, however that manifests itself. And it's acknowledging that. And so constantly just kind of coming back and slowing it down. And it's also what is the smallest part that is tolerable. And if you go at that level, then, what's the tiniest little bit of discomfort that you can tolerate right now? And we will be talking about, because we use memory, we use talking to elicit a nervous system response in somatic experiencing. But, and it can be as simple as, so for some people, at some point we might talk about your history and you can notice that charge. We're not talking about it today. And, and there can be a change there of even just saying, so you're here, we know that there's the story and what happens, and you're just noticing that there is something happening for them. And then, the skill is to observe that, is to see, oh, there's a flushing, there's a tightening of the jaw, there's the hands are being held in a particular way. And I was like, okay, but we're not going to talk about it today. And then you notice the flushing reduces, there's a breath, and it's just like, okay, notice what happened there. And that might be it. That might be a whole session. It can be you missed a bus on your way here. So how does that impact you? You probably have, you don't want to be late. It's really annoying. You can have there can be a whole gamut of responses just to missing a bus. And you can work on that. Because what we're doing is, the content is I'm not going to say is of less interest, because somebody's story is beautiful and needs to be honored and witnessed and held. But in terms of this work, what we're interested in is the charge that is able to be held by the container. And if we can facilitate a greater capacity by talking about missing a bus, if that enables the nervous system to have a response where it's, oh yeah, it's not that important, might be the end, meaning, and we know it's not important, but to have the body feel that it's less important, and the way they will experience that is you'll revisit it, and and the body feels more expansive. Within that, you have changed the nervous system's capacity to hold an amount of charge. So the story was being late for a bus. The same charge might exist for I need to email somebody. So you work with this bit of content, and then suddenly that bit of content becomes easier, becomes more tolerable. Does that, because it's not the sort of content per se, it's the body's response to the content.
Yeah, beautiful. I tell you, like, it's just the best thing I've ever done is this podcast. I mean, it's just like, I'm learning so much. I guess this is just awesome. This is just school of life. It's just so interesting. And there's so much coming up when I'm thinking back in my journey. I remember being like an apprentice with 23. It was sort of my first, like, I've put my little toe in the waters of the corporate world. And I remember so many instances in daily life sitting in front of that computer. Major nervous system deregulations happening, like somewhat of traumatic responses of getting hit with unexpected emails, conversations, calls, meetings. And I remember really I remember running to the bathroom and completely having, sweating and having, like real like heart racing, like physical reactions to these
Yeah.
stimuli, and I did not have any tools, any, not even I couldn't even categorize what was happening. It was literally just washing over me like a hurricane, and it was just like, oh my god, what is happening? And obviously the very same triggers now, um, and I still feel. I literally yesterday I opened some letters from the finance department of the of the state, and that's always like a thing. Like you always like I don't know how it is for you, but for me, when I get letters, when I get any sort of like letters from the finance department, like my mind goes like I'm gonna go to jail like tomorrow, so there is like a bodily sensation for me that is
Yeah.
like it's triggering something, and I guess all I want to say with that is just like there's a huge, and this is like we're talking like 7-8 years and a lot of workshops and stuff like that. But like, so first of all, the trigger is still there. It's
Yeah.
still there, and sometimes it will hit me harder than other times. And Yeah, it's a journey. It's a journey, and it's like I guess I will also want to highlight that this is like I feel something that's so tangible and like pragmatic. And this is why I also think it's so relevant and important. This work that you are doing, for example, is
Yeah.
very important work because yeah, no matter like it doesn't, when you hear this, like trauma and all that, basically it's just like, well, I don't, why should I have trauma?
Yeah.
I live an ordinary life.
Yeah.
I don't have, both of my parents are alive. So what are you talking about? Didn't, I wasn't involved in a car accident and whatever. So, I guess we just, this is the quest of having conversations like this. It's like also to draw people in who, potentially don't have any idea previously of what this work is involving, and then it's just like, oh, all right, yeah, but I know situations getting an email and feeling like some discomfort. I know looking around the room and having those kind of triggers come up within. So thank you for showing or like highlighting that it is might be some like tiny traumatic response of my nervous system right there, and we can there is practices that help to regulate that. It's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, and with this, becoming, I suppose, more comfortable with charge, however you want to conceive it. It's not that charge doesn't, we should be doing this. We should be having this kind of like, so I don't know if your letters are brown in Germany, in England
Yeah,
they're brown.
they're like on this organic paper. They're printed on organic paper. It's horrible.
And of course, if nothing else, it's like, oh, there's a bill. There's something bad is going to happen. And, it's not that we should be getting to a stage where, it doesn't impact me. It's like, oh, okay, that's something that is going to happen. But it's about being able to, yeah, okay, that happened, and I'm going to open the letter, for example, not, I've got this brown letter, I'm going to hide it in a drawer and not look at it because it's too scary. It's like, okay, let's find out what it is. Let's, you find out you've got a tax refund. Who knows? And suddenly it's like, whoa. But this is, so life is like this. And actually what we want to be able to do is to ride that, but not go into a state of overwhelm. And, we're all going to be triggered. Life is triggering. But sometimes it's as simple as, oh, okay, that happened. And, I'm noticing it. I'm still thinking about it. Like this inconsequential thing happened to me. Like there's some little, and I haven't let it go. So that, to me, when that happens to me, it's like, okay, there's something there that could do with a little bit of work. It's those moments. So for me, for example, if I perceive that someone is being rude, they're sort of butting up against my boundary. It's like, how quickly. So to give an example, you're walking along the street and you get the sense, one of you has to move, and that there's this dance, as human beings, we dance. And so we can both very gracefully avoid and rejoin, we're just at our paths. And there are times when that just doesn't happen. And I remember this happening quite recently. And in fact, my experience of it was there was a deliberate block.
Mm.
And I found that incredibly challenging, on all sorts of levels. And for quite a long time, I was ruminating about what was going on there. And then there will be other moments where another sort of seemingly similar kind of inconsequential conflict will happen, and I just move straight on. Go, and something that maybe would have been something that would have stuck with me, like, going into a crowded place and not feeling comfortable. And, and previously I might have given myself all sorts of bad, messages about why I'm in some way failing. And now it's like, don't know anyone. It's fine. It's, maybe I'll make a conversation with someone. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll leave. All of these things are fine. And that is because I now don't, I've done enough on that aspect of, my identity, if you like, in that sort of social setting, that it doesn't stay with me.
Psst, hey, this is just going to be a very brief reminder. If you enjoyed this episode thus far, you can do me an enormous favor and give me 15 seconds of your valuable time. Go to your podcast app right now. And if you enjoyed it, give Going Out Looking In a 5-star rating. And while you're at it, hit that follow button and that bell icon to be notified whenever a new episode is being uploaded. Thank you so much for your support, and let's go straight into the episode. Yeah.
Does that make sense? So I still have the response, but I don't hold on to it. There's a great... So I'm remembering this story about... I can't remember where it comes from, but it's about two... Is that okay, Sid? It's about two Buddhist monks who are walking along a path, and it's in the tradition where the male monks were not meant to touch females.
Right.
And then there's a woman who needs to, for some reason, cross like a puddle or something like this. And so one of the monks, picks up the woman and helps her get across, and puts her down, and they carry on. And then about an hour later, the monk, the one that didn't help, turned to the other monk and said, why did you help that? You've broken our rules. This is really, it's, something, you've done something that you shouldn't have done. And the other monk turned to him and just said, oh, okay, that's interesting. I let that woman go an hour ago, and you're still carrying her.
Hmm.
And I really like that as a kind of, we pick up these things, and how quickly can we put them down is often I think, a sign of whether or not we have that capacity in that particular sphere, whatever it is, if that makes sense. So what happens
Absolutely.
in the brain,
And
and
I feel like also like it's um this might sound, I don't know, this might expose a part of me that, it's funny to some, I don't know. But I literally like if I, so for example, like the tax letter instance.
yeah,
So I found myself really sometimes if it's really like if it's really like a big trigger, I will literally facilitate like a small ceremony around it. Like I will, like, there will be candles lit, there will be maybe some incense lit, there will be some
yeah,
energy clearing and some preparation, and like a very conscious uh setting where I'm like, okay, so this is gonna happen now, and I go in, I go into this. I consciously dip in and dive into whatever will come up here, and I I I feel like this is it helped me with some bigger things, also some emails where I knew, I don't know, or some confrontational conversations, basically, for example, you confront somebody with something and then you get the reply, so
yeah.
you see the message and okay, and so like you just don't want to open it just like somewhere on the go, or like, so I've learned to delay that to a point of like where I can, yeah, facilitate an environment for myself where it's like safe, like you say. And then I also know, like, if I was to cry, I can, or scream or whatever, do, so it all of that, it can happen, and I sort of prepare myself in that way, um and yeah, I get great, it's not always possible, and I also don't always succeed in that, but something that very practically I figured out for myself that I can do to handle those, like, quite, the bigger ones, and then, obviously then there will be life throwing you all other sorts of curveballs. I'm just thinking about, phew, getting a call about someone, I don't know, having an accident or something. Obviously, there's nothing you can prepare, nothing
Mm.
you can, do in that moment other than receive that and then deal with that to the best of your abilities. But there are things that we see coming and that we can, basically then set stage for, and establish a setting where we feel maybe slightly more comfortable in facing these uncomfortable situations. Yeah.
Yeah, so a couple of things come to mind for that. Firstly is um, by doing it with the things that you can see coming, you are effectively practicing capacity for them when things are coming out of the blue. And the way you describe setting up your sort of ceremonial area is a wonderful resource, and that's something that works for you. That you're giving it space. I'm sure because of your spirituality, having a candle, having the incense, that feels like a safe container for you.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then going through the process is going to be something that will resource whatever experience you have.
Yeah. Yeah. It's often also when taking medication, to be honest. I had to. I reached a point this summer where I had to take antibiotics, and I and I really haven't for years, and I hopefully
Mm.
will not for many more years have to consume any of those. But in that instance, I was suffering from something for quite a long time, and yeah, there was just no way around. In also because travels were ahead and all that. Anyway, so I also did a ceremony prior
Yeah.
to taking the antibiotics. Yeah, because I wanted to establish somewhat of a connection from this externally chemically manufactured substance
Mm.
that is then entering my body. And as we know, there is a massive, I've learned this from living in a monastery. There is a massive, there is a massive connection between the like your conscious awareness, for example, when it comes to food, and your body's ability to receive the nutrients. So there is a big, like it has a big effect on how consciously aware of the food you are, and how,
Yeah.
with every bite and stuff, you're like literally flexing the muscle of, oh right, yeah, I'm literally consuming nutrients into my body. That's what I'm doing, right? And with the
Yeah.
monastery, it's like, you're very intentional about it. You're like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm consuming this food because I want to pursue Buddha's way. That's what they'll say, basically with the prayers and stuff. So you're like, okay, yeah, that's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm actually eating. And so I'm keeping my body fed so I can do something,
Yes.
and that is, I found that very helpful. And I with the antibiotics, that oftentimes I have side effects, and I have other sort of like things come up then. But with that, in that particular instance, I did not. And
Mm.
that might be just like some, I guess there might be like some percentage of people going, yeah, okay, well, that's just woo woo. But I feel like there's a massive difference in like just shoving down stuff your system, whatever it is, or consuming, or interacting with anything, or doing it, consciously. That's at least my experience. But
Yeah. Well, we know that conscious intention changes outcome. We know that, don't we? We know the benefit of we know the benefit of meditation on our DNA, on our telomeres. We know the benefit of setting intentions for the meditative practices that the studies that they've done in terms of what's happening in the world because a bunch of people over here have done
yes,
something. So we know that these things happen already. And I mean, yeah, we're getting into, amazing topics about, Joe Dispenza and the work that he has done about, the power of intention and what it does. Like in the monastery, the intentional eating, what that does for your body's capacity to absorb nutrients.
yeah,
All of this stuff is fascinating. It's amazing.
it is. So, Tamsin, I would love to, because we threw around those terms now, as we, especially me, as I knew what I was talking about, but to a certain degree, I certainly don't.
Yeah.
When talking about somatic experiencing or rolfing. So, having you on in this conversation, I would be, I would be curious to dive into that a little bit more, and to find out, I think we quite well established the and paved the way for the understanding of trauma, or like stored emotions and triggers within the body and embodiment, and the benefits of that. And now it's more like, okay, so now we got certain modalities that help doing that. And I, out of very personal curiosity, am asking, what, so, taking somatic experiencing and Rolfing as two of those, um, what might be a little summary, and then also what are the differences in it, and as you are doing, you're combining the two. So how does that work? Yeah, I'm very curious.
So a little summary of both of the
Yeah,
modalities.
yeah.
So, well, Rolfing is it's a bodywork technique, so it's touch. It We go through a process of, so it's done in a series of 10.
Right.
The first sort of encounter that you have with Rolfing, this is the sort of like the ideal way. And we're looking at the body's way to be in its most sort of, if you like, efficient organization.
Mm-hmm.
It was created by this woman, Ida Rolf, and we're thinking about, gravity. So if you imagine a sort of like a plumb line going through the crown of your head and into the ground, it's a sort of how is the body sort of organized around that line. It's slightly different to alignment. So we're not looking for a perfect alignment, but we're looking at how it is that the body can organize itself sort of around that line so that it can benefit most from the inherent anatomical efficiencies that exist within the body. So, for example, when we walk, we are designed to walk in a particular way. As life happens to us, we tend to move away from that ideal. Spent years in high heels. We have tight little shoes. We have hurt our knee, something. So there are lots of these little things that can impact us. I'm shy of the world, so I start to close a little bit. And all of these little inhibitions that we will have end up impacting the body. So what we'd seek to do in Rolfing is, if you like, to sort of remove those inhibitions to the greatest extent that we're able to. And Ida Rolf created this series of a sort of protocol of 10 individual sessions. And we start with the breath. So session 1 is about opening up the breath, opening up the capacity. And then we work, session 2 is the feet, and we literally work up the body. And what we're doing when we're sort of first engaging with people, we're sort of looking at somebody and sort of, okay, so how are you? How are you standing? How are you walking? And we observe sort of shifts, where the weight is the weight held back, is the pelvis tilted under, and is the torso a little bit back from the hips, where sometimes the head shifts forward, it goes to the side, all these sort of like tiny little adaptations that we've made because of whatever's happened to us in life. And so our goal is to facilitate a change so that the body comes back, as I say, to its best and most efficient organization. And we're doing that through a process of, again, it's very conscious. So the difference between Rolfing and, it's because it looks like a massage, you're on the table, someone's touching you. But we engage the client. So, it can be simple movement, move your foot backwards and forwards, lift your knee. And that's a very important part of it, because then it's like there's a body remapping, if you like, that happens during the process. And the use of imagination can be very helpful. so that, we can literally, so we can sort of feel ourselves grow, and we give the client the experience of what happens if they do that. So, for example, somebody lying on the table, you sort of drop your legs to one side or the other. How much is, what's the capacity? So, what is the freedom of the pelvis from the rest of the body? And then you start introducing, okay, so now just imagine that you're growing, that there's a light coming out of your head, and this is while they're on the table. Okay, now do that movement. And suddenly the movement becomes much bigger. There's not been any tissue work at that point. And so we're also introducing these less tangible tools. Can you use your senses, use where you're looking, bringing the periphery in, what happens to the way you stand, for example. So there's this interplay of physical touch, and then also what I love about it is it's how do you then move out into the world?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? So how are you experiencing yourself, and how do you go forward?
I have one tiny question.
Yes.
So you were talking about like basically realigning or helping the body well,
Organize.
it's not about aligning, right? So it's not about alignment. You said it's about organization. So I would be curious to, like, how do you know or find out what this initial, like, supposed to be organization is for an individual, that you basically then, through Rolfing therapy, through manual therapy, that you help the client to get back to, like, how do you know where to get back to?
Well, so there obviously is an alignment. We just don't tend to use that because it can be quite prescriptive.
Right.
This is how you're meant to stand.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, there are ways that there's an anatomical position of people. We stand upright. We have to, our weight is equally balanced on both legs, and our head sort of sits above our torso. It doesn't sort of protrude. We know that that's not anatomically
I understand.
the best. So what we're doing is we're doing a body reading. You're literally sort of like, okay, so what do you look like? What do you look like? And client's going to be in underwear. And so I'm sort of noticing there could be some really obvious things. Like I say, a head shift is a pretty obvious one. But the back can be very back. There can be a big curvature in the back. The pelvis can be really tilted. And you just go, that's just not... You just know, you learn that's not a very efficient way of being in the world, and it might create a block for literally the transmission of energy. Your foot meets the ground, your toe hinge off, and then energy goes up through your body. There's this very, there's an anatomical pathway of what then happens. The triggering of the various muscles. And so we have that, if you like, as a goal, but we just hold it lightly because we don't know what's happened to in somebody's life. And it can often be the case that, there can be physical impediments, anatomically, something has happened. There's been, a break somewhere. And there can be emotional, psychological inhibitions. So, and we're just, there's introducing that kind of like, it's a compassionate inquiry. There's an allowing, it's sort of like an evolution of what happens. The way we're assessing it, if you like, is, okay, so now what does that person look like? What's happened to their organization? If they were like curved like that? Have they come? Is this happening? We often talk about what's missing, and this can sound very a little bit woo-woo, but you look at somebody and you might notice it's like, what's the... It's like this part of their body is really strong, and then their lower legs, they're not. What's missing?
Right.
And you'll do a process of, of touching and movement and bringing awareness, etc. And actually what happens is suddenly over the course of 10 sessions, suddenly the whole leg, it now balances. The upper and the lower leg look like they belong to the same leg. So something has happened during that process, like literally the calf muscle has appeared because previously it has been so tightly bound. So that's how you're sort of assessing, if you like, the outcome for the client. But also there can be the intangible sense of people. So I'm very, very touched. I don't think I've had someone who hasn't at some point said, I just feel more confident. And that's that's what I love is this, like I say, it's this sort of, it's how are you meeting the world? So when things start to feel like there's a greater flow, there's a greater capacity, the sort of, life force, if you like, the experience is that it just flows more easily. And, we're getting into woo-woo. There's none of this is proven through any sort of studies. So I want to be careful about what I'm claiming. This is just my experience of people that I've worked with. But yeah, this sort of greater sense of maybe being in the world and being allowed to be in the world often emerges.
Right.
And so that's sort of, that's how I would describe Rolfing. It doesn't, and you can approach it just so, for example, the first 3 can be done as a little mini series, and then you do the 10. And then after you've done that, it's up to you. You can come back and have little top-ups. You can do another 10 series in a, few years' time when your body feels cool to do it. So that's how Rolfing works. Somatic experiencing is, it's a trauma-informed practice. It was created by Peter Levine, who, he particularly noticed how in the wild animals don't get, they don't have traumatic symptoms.
Right.
And so he was very curious about, what is it that we do that is in some way sort of creating these symptoms to arise, where actually in nature animals do quite literally shake it off. And so he started working particularly with veterans, some people who had PTSD, and just noticing that the work that he was doing was helping people. And we talk about the defensive responses and how they might have been in some way inhibited. So it's as if the body wanted or would have wanted to do something, let's say, needed to fight, but for some reason it couldn't fight. Then it's as if this is sort of held in. And so we can complete those defensive responses how that transpires will be different from one person to another. And, so we're going, so I'm sort of trying to come back again. What's the arc here? What we're particularly focusing on is the autonomic nervous system and how it can tolerate an amount of arousal within the system before it kind of tips into what we call activation. So sort of arousal is that natural, this is what I can cope with, and then activation is when it's sort of becoming,
Right.
outside the realm of what's possible. So we are we're bringing that awareness, we're increasing this window of tolerance that people have. So you imagine a sort of, a line between which people can operate. If we've got a traumatized system, that tends to get smaller. So what we want to do is we want to gradually just open that up again for people. And that will enable us, it improves that capacity to be able to deal with things that previously, they would have gone outside what they were able to tolerate. And as that happens, then life becomes, the flow starts to come back into life. And what then happens, so people's the way they react, the way they respond to triggers changes. And if there are any associated sort of health issues that, autoimmune syndromes or chronic fatigue, for example, these things to some extent can be ameliorated by the nervous system being able to not be in this sort of stuck place.
Right.
So wanting to not go off too much for it to be.
Yeah. No. It's yeah. It's so interesting. It's so super interesting, and so yeah, I see a big connection to what we discussed earlier, and I think it's a very good image. Like, I just I see it very vividly in front of me, and I can think of like examples where I'm navigating this the flow of life and the ups and downs, and I'm widening my tolerance and threshold of tolerable experiences. And so do I. So now when it comes to combining those two within your work, um, there might be, we might, I don't know, we might have to go also into the differences, or maybe on the boundaries, or like the or where we can take those certain modalities, and where one comes in when the other one is not able to address certain things. Because I can imagine, that's what I'm asking basically, is like, so I'm getting that Rolfing is very much focused on, also physically working on and with the body, whereas with somatic experiencing, what I picked up on, and you tell me if that is correct, or like whatever you feel like needs to be added, that you basically guide the individual through certain experiences, and then together you are tuning into what is happening also body on a body in the body and the sensations. And you, like you said at the very beginning, you basically you go a little bit further into it each time, so that you are like widening that capacity. But yeah, so that's what I understood. But basically I'm also interested in now hearing how you combine those two now when working with people.
Yeah. So So obviously everything will be, what's appropriate, what the preference is
Right.
for a particular individual. So then maybe starting from that place.
Okay, so sorry, I have to then I have a question. So basically, there will be also people who say like who come with the agenda of like I want a Rolfing treatment adjustment or something, and then or there will be people who literally will say I wanna I wanna be treated with the technique of somatic experiencing or something.
Yeah, for sure.
Right, right,
Sure.
okay, okay,
What quite often happens, which is interesting, is that sometimes clients will come, saying
yeah.
to be Rolfed, and then we'll end up doing SE. um, I suppose, and sometimes they say, "Well, what do you think?"
Right,
And so I operate from a kind of, if you like, a concept that wherever the stuckness is, so it's like I call it like the grossest level. So if it's a physical stuckness, then let's not do let's not do the spiritual work. Let's do let's get in there. It's something that's but so that will quite often manifest. So for example, if you think of someone who is they're depressed, we know that there's a body posture for
right,
that. Yeah. If Does the body need to be helped to be in this position before then the next level of kind of work can be really effective? Then that's often an exploration. So for example, if someone is stuck in this posture, they might have done an awful lot of talking therapy and really understand that that's not where they are anymore. They've understood everything, but their body keeps telling them that they're depressed, so it keeps dragging them down. So is it necessary to just kind of help them come open, to open this bed, to lift the head, to be with can you navigate maybe the discomfort of coming into that place? Because often our bodies don't necessarily like being open, and we have to do that quite gently because this is safe. Yeah? So that's also if you like, the beauty of the touch where there's this physical opening. That can also be too much. So then you move into the SE work. Conversely, you might have worked with somebody physically, and it's like, okay, there's nothing that I can sense that is stopping the next level of organization. And then you go, okay, so how much is the body bracing? So, the fact that the shoulders don't swing, is it because I'm literally just holding them really tight because that is what, makes me able to be in the world? Yeah, and this can be done as such. These are tiny little things that we're not aware of anymore because that's how we live our life. But that might be something that's actually holding the body back from its next level of kind of fluidity. So then it's like, okay, let's explore that bracing pattern. What is that bracing pattern doing? And then we'll explore that in an SE session. Does that make sense? And then maybe
absolutely.
go back to the table and then say, look, now the body is more open to this bit of work, the physical stuff. So the way I work, it tends to be either SE or Rolfing. It can be that within a Rolfing session, something comes up and we have the time to just give a little bit of space to it, do a little bit of noticing. and then carry on back with the Rolfing. Because I had the SE training, then I had the nervous system awareness, if you like. So that is, a lot of that has to do then with pacing, how deeply I might work with someone. So it's not an SE session, but it's sort of SE informed, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Makes great
I
sense.
wouldn't
I
do the
talked to
same two different ones.
Yeah, I talked to trauma therapists, and basically what I'm extracted there is just also the importance of, you know, let's say the like a sensitivity that comes within working within SE is like a trauma integrated, or at least trauma informed approach to working with individuals in the space of healing, which then will translate to any other modality that you use, because you are aware of the system's reaction to trauma, which is coming from, which is coming from knowing and working within the field of SE. And so that
Yeah,
is, yeah, that's something that I basically extracted. I was like, okay, that's very interesting. And basically, especially one person comes to mind who I truly and highly respect, and he basically pointed out that he believes that the whole healing environment and lots of modalities that basically are located within this container of healing need need a trauma in at least trauma informed training as well, because and I know that from personal experiences, just what I talked about earlier, when doing, for example, online breathwork sessions, we are going deep into potential waters of trauma and deregulation of a nervous system. And so a trauma informed approach when doing that might be a lifesaver, or like a saver for that moment of where somebody is at in the individual journey. So uh
definitely,
yeah,
definitely.
so that came up as well while you were sharing that. um I was curious. So, just for my understanding, so within the work of SE, are you like, is there any like body work included, or is it mainly like speaking
It
about things?
it
Yeah.
depends. So touch can be included. It's not. It's more of a supportive touch.
Right.
You know, it can be. So I might hold someone's shoulders, for example. I might put my feet on their feet. Um, I might put weight on their legs, for example. Then there's also, so we touched on the sort of defensive responses, and so one of them, of course, being fight, and it can be that sometimes people notice that something's happening in the hand. So let's investigate that. And it might be that there's this sort of inner urge that emerges to effectively kind of to do a punch.
Mm.
And so I might then just offer the resistance. Okay, so what is it like to have that just being met, for that to be okay, to explore that? What happens? So there's that sort of touch that can come into the space. But it's not, it's not a body work.
Right, I understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
So having said all that, why is this important to you, this work?
That's a good one, isn't it? Um, because I think, yeah, so there are lots of different answers to that. I suppose partly it's sharing the benefit that I had, and continue to have. I'm still doing all this stuff myself. So it's a desire to share what I have benefited from. It's a belief that this is what the world needs. I believe that we're in an incredibly traumatized space and time, particularly in the West. So I think that we need as many people as possible to realize that, so that we can start living in a different way. So it's like, each person is just planting a little seed, if you like. So, maybe if I can plant a little seed somewhere, then, that's beautiful. And I think also it's what I enjoy. I really enjoy seeing people change, and I enjoy being in this world. I enjoy the people that I meet. So selfishly, you talked about how you didn't enjoy being in marketing anymore. I had the same experience, you know. So it feels aligned to what my needs are as well. Yeah, and it's a wonderful privilege to be with people as they're changing.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. That's those are perfectly reasonable reasons. Yeah. No, it's yeah. I think it's funny because, like, for example, this is a question that was asked at the like, I was being asked that question one of my very first podcasts that I did, and it caught me a little bit off guard. And it had me thinking. It got me thinking a long time. It has been with me for nearly a year now. Yeah, it was one of the first interviews I did, and Richard Lang from he's also from London, who came up with the headless way, and he's like a direct disciple of Douglas Harding, English philosopher, and he developed like a technique of like the headless way. So basically it's a philosophical contemplative modality in which you basically tune into how life would be if you were having no head, because that is what Douglas Harding basically sort of he came up with, because he painted he saw a painting of an artist who painted a like POV painting from a professor sitting like laying on a bench in his office, from a POV. So you see his legs, you see the whole room and everything, and you see his hands in front. And he saw that picture and he was like, that is how I perceive the world, but I never saw my head. So
Mm-hmm.
what and where am I looking out of? Like, I actually don't have a head. So I'm just headless, It doesn't start, it doesn't end. It's just like this space. And so it turned into this whole like self-realization technique where you're like really sort of investigating and contemplating on where thoughts are coming from, where you are coming from, and where you are basically, where it is that your inspirations from our human experience are originating. And it's just like this, it dawns more and more on one doing these there's like a bunch of experiments you can do, and basically it dawns on you like, oh my god, like they're literally like, I don't have a head. Like, I'm headless. It's an open space. It doesn't start. It
Yeah.
doesn't end somewhere. And basically, thoughts and ideas and creativity as well. It arises from source. it arises from a place that I cannot grasp. It just doesn't. It
Yeah.
doesn't have a.
Yeah.
It's not tangible. So yeah, super interesting. Sorry, I got a little bit carried away there with this thing, but he asked me that question. That's all I wanted to say with that. Like he asked me why. So why is this important to you? And I was like,
Mm.
yeah, why is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so
Yeah.
yeah,
Why
I
are we
love
drawn to this?
exactly right.
But I
Um,
think, yeah, it's. I suspect that the answer is pretty similar for most people. Feeling a need to make a difference, having been, the route that they go, it will have been the route that they've explored and that they've found a benefit to them. And hopefully because they enjoy it, and it's wonderful because you get to meet all these beautiful people who are doing the same thing, who probably share a similar outlook on life, about, why is this important, but also what else is important,
mhm.
because this is a part of my life. What else, but there's a tendency to be quite aligned, I think, with people who are also doing this work on all the
Absolutely,
other
from all
big.
different angles. It's
Yeah,
amazing. Like the color
yeah.
scheme of the self-development field or whatever you want to call it is unbelievable. So there's many roads to the mountain, and seeing by the responses I get from the podcast and from people, there's like it varies. People resonate with more like tangible and pragmatic approaches, and then there will be people who really like the transcending uh realms of healing. And so who am I to spoon fed anything? Like I'm just offering the certain things,
Yeah,
and people pick out what they resonate with. And I feel that's wonderful. And it also is a personal journey for me. And this is, all of that led me now to have a conversation with you about Rolfing, about somatic experiencing, because that is the this like the like distilled, like what sort of like condensed sort of rest is like that's what I'm left with from so many conversations, is that I so much resonate with and feel like I understood that, like there is, and I can identify with that there's so much to be understood cognitively. And I feel like I have understood a lot.
mm,
I've read all primary texts of all religions. I've lived in the monastery. I have contemplated all of these philosophies and whatnot. So,
yeah,
and then non-duality, and transcending into all higher realms and whatnot.
yes, yeah,
All right, okay,
yeah.
I understand that.
Done that.
Yeah, and then it's like, and then there's life, and what good does all of that do if I just still walk around highly reactive, and highly being triggered constantly by outer environments and circumstances, and not having tools to regulate that, or like to deal with that and compartmentalize that. And so that's where I then further got into, okay, yeah, there might be something with this thing here, the flesh suit, the sensory suit that we
Yeah,
just, inhabited in this lifetime, in this incarnation. It's just like, that's and it has its limits, it has boundaries, it has things that, and, as much as spirit is formless and timeless and all of that, we're still inhabiting this suit here. And it's a wonderful thing. I feel like, being human is a wow. It's like a and then with being conscious of that as well, it adds a whole other like
yeah,
layer to it. And it's just like, holy cow, like we really, whoever, the souls that we are and decided to be incarnated in human experience, like we are going for it. We're really
yeah.
experiencing, we we go all
And
in.
we have to be ready for that. And as I sort of come back to this thing about, we have our we've got our body, we've got our emotional experience, we've got our intellectual experience, we have our spiritual experience. And actually, if we keep coming back to, we can, this is where, why my focus is, I think, if you like, at this end, because it feels like if these aren't right, then you can't, we can have, wonderful spiritual healings and practices and all these things, which I very much, that's a very big part of my life as well. But actually, if this bit is not able to receive it, to contain it, like you say, we're our little sort of flesh suits walking around. And actually they need to be able to contain this experience. And so if this keeps kind of coming back down, if we get so triggered, if we're not living our most fulfilled kind of like physical experience, because we've got whatever sort of wound is holding us down physically, then we can't have the next layer of sort of freedom, if you like. And I keep coming back to this. I keep coming back to where does it need to happen first? And and that can be as simple as really good nutrition. If we're not feeding ourselves well, how do we expect to have these sort of purely, transcendental moments? Because the vessel isn't strong enough, it's not nurtured enough. So yeah, I really sort of resonate with that. And also, I mean, for me, I think, I'm very much in the world, and having a spiritual experience as well. But it has to be, for me, I have to be sort of grounded in this world. And it's this world, this messy, chaotic, beautiful world that we're living in right now in these times. And yeah, so for me, this is sort of like the grounded aspect of the spiritual experiences is very, very important right now.
So towards the end, I explore like 2, 3 questions with people, and yeah,
Yeah.
I'm excited where you're gonna take it. So one thing I would like to ask you is what are you proud of?
Oof. I think so. You're in terms of achievement. I'm very proud of my little son. That's a sort of life achievement that I think I'm probably most proud of. In terms of, for me, I think I'm so proud of where I've got to so far. I think I see the change in my life going, way back when. And, and I'm not saying there's not an awful lot more to be done, but I think I can genuinely now own that thing of I'm proud of where I've got to.
Beautiful.
I'm proud of where I'm going to be going next.
What?
Not that I've got the faintest idea where that is.
Yeah, we'll figure that out as we go.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you feel like in this world we need more of?
Connection, community. I think we desperately need community.
And what do we need less of?
how to surmise that, really. I don't need to come up with one. It's not a one-word answer, is it? I think, the division that's, apparent, the division from nature. I mean, my very strong desire is that I think that we should be moving towards or moving back to a place where we're actually living with, with this amazing planet. And actually understanding our sort of place in it. That we're a part of a system. We're not on top of this system which is doing something for us. We need to come back into the understanding that we are part of that system. Which I think is sort of contrary, maybe that's, part of this division that I think we need less of. Dividing ourselves from nature, from our sort of our spiritual self, our animal self, our social selves as well. It's a really important part of it. And, the polarizing that's happening in the world at the moment.
Yeah.
Setting people against each other.
Yeah. So speaking about that, what are you looking forward to?
Well, looking forward, I suppose is to move closer towards that sense of community and, and being in touch with nature, and hopefully sharing that with other people as well, within this sort of held space. That feels like that is a very, very important part of the next iteration of this little flesh suit.
Yeah, beautiful. So actually, I've one. This is just coming up now, but I want to ask you this because you touched on it 2 times in this conversation, and I feel like I want to give you the opportunity to speak on it, however long or brief you want to. But what did motherhood change for you or introduce you to in your life, and what does it mean to you being a mom?
What did it introduce? And what does
Yeah,
it
maybe
mean?
what does it? Yeah.
It's introduced a whole hell of a lot of chaos. But it's, that's really welcome. My life was pretty organized. I could go to yoga, I could go and sit like this, or else, it looked pretty good. And then along this little person, and that's out the window. But it's a different, so now the kind of the opportunities. So instead of, sitting there in a Zen moment, it's like, okay, so now do that with a screaming child. Yeah. How to be, so I am learning so much about the quality of presence that a child requires. And that actually we all require. They just need more of it. but the quality is, it's a very, very human, unadulterated quality that they are able to show us. Like, they'll let you know when you're not present because they'll tell you, you know. Um, and so it's brought in, and it's brought in many, so in this sphere, it's brought in new community, it's brought in new friendships, it's brought in a whole gamut of sort of experiences that I wouldn't have had otherwise. It's brought in, that experience of unconditional love, which is a huge thing to have, to experience that. Yeah, just the joy of seeing a small person achieve little things, to have their joy, and to be able to sort of witness that, to witness them exploring the world. It's just, it's a huge privilege and a huge responsibility, to what extent, can I provide what he needs? What were your questions? What does it introduce?
Yeah, into your life, and what does it mean for you to be a mom? Yeah,
It means the world. Yeah, it means
right.
the world.
It's, to be honest, like for me as like someone who not yet has children, it is, I ask that question anyone who has children and who I'm speaking with, if the conversation allows, I'm asking it. I'm just genuinely curious, and something that really struck me, looking at it from the outside, is just like this apparent discrepancy between it's the most challenging, like hardest thing I've ever done. It's like the most like tiring, and like the most like it just drives you absolutely insane. And then at the same time, it is like the best thing that ever happened for and to me,
Yeah.
and I would not change a thing. And to like
So
and people keep telling me like you won't understand until you experience it yourself, because literally from looking at it from the outside, I'm just like, well, you just literally said the complete opposite of the other thing.
I heard there
But
was a funny. I think this is an amusing way of describing it. That it makes your life 100 times worse, but 1,000 times better.
mm, I love that.
It's
Yeah.
good, isn't it? And that kind of sums it up. Um, yeah, it's you can't. I mean, I remember. So I remember going into this journey, going, "Oh, everyone going on about how tired they are." Yeah, because I've naturally got a bit more energy than most people. And so I'm just like, yeah, they're just, it's going to be a walk in the park for me. You want something to humble you, have a child.
Yeah, and I feel like also, to make that transition from me, like ego, and sort of like, the world turns around and evolves around my development,
Yes.
to like, serving and being humble about, basically being, this world being more about what I can do also for, you know other people other than myself, and I feel like our generation especially, which I also observe, is sometimes it literally lead to not wanting children, because young people realize, oh my god, potentially that would mean that I don't have 24/7 out of my day and week solely to focus on my personal development, where and then it did the opposite for me. I desperately want to have children at some point. Like, I know this is also part of why I'm here in the first place, but that's a different thing. But I also feel like very like personally for me that will be a huge potential for growth for me, because quite frankly, how I was conditioned and how we are conditioned in the West, I mean, we think it's all about us, aren't we? Like, it's just about my personal growth and development. And so I guess like this will be a very good wake up call, and a very good playground of me just being of service to someone else, that I deeply care about, obviously.
But also, why are we so invested in personal development? Is it just for ourselves, or is it, why are we doing it? And you will inevitably, you know, the like I say, the greatest presence practice is looking after a kid. I used to beat myself up about, I haven't meditated today. It's like, no, but I have been, I have been there for him. I have had it, I've had my face slapped about kind of like, why are you checking out your phone? It's like, you're right. He's the biggest teacher in terms of, you're not here. Where are you? Come back here. And, so it's a different level, but it is exhausting and it is overwhelming. And I don't think that we're doing it right in the West at all. I think it's far too much pressure in a nuclear family. It's crazy.
It's
It really
actually
is.
it's actually very interesting right now, because like something that just popped in my head is just like, yeah, like I'm assuming that that is why we have such a booming personal development industry in the first place, because we, you know, and evolution is obviously not linear, right? So sometimes we go 1, 2, 3 steps forward and then we take 5 back. And I feel
Yeah.
like with some of that, with parenting and how we view that and how we, develop more into like a very egocentric sort of like worldview, and everything is just in the hyper individualization of society. I feel like that is why we then sort of need this huge industry of like, books and seminars and all of that to, be present and find that out, instead of just like, yeah, why don't you just like, run a family that might be getting you into presence, right? And so, it's about like, I'm on my personal quest with that, figuring out, what I can take also from my parents and from my ancestors and my lineage and the people who came before me, knowing, I'm not, I am not as entitled, or like I entitled enough, or like selfish enough, or like arrogant enough to believe that, everything that, that we, or that I can learn, I will learn in my lifetime, and I learn by, reading what I want to read or something. I'm just like, no, like I'm just like this tiny little thing, in time, and there's so much behind me, and my ancestors, they kept themselves alive for long enough for me to be here. So like, there is something to be learned from them, and not to condemn everything that they've done, which I feel like is a little bit of the narrative, it's just like everything that in the past is just like all bad, and I don't know, it's just like, I'm not so sure if that's true,
Well, yeah,
and
I'm at the other end of the spectrum. I think that, you know, we have a huge amount that we need to learn from people who are still living in a way, if you like, that is for us many generations ago. But
yeah.
then that's where I'm in awe of the wisdom that comes from people who are still living in that way, and I think they've got a huge amount to teach us. community, living in nature. You don't have the thing that does. Um, it does, I think, also make you incredibly aware that bringing a child into the world in the way that we are now, I genuinely don't believe that we should be raising children the way that we do in in terms of the sort of like the nuclear family, because it's too much pressure on parents.
Right.
And and kids should be with a wider group of people, the multi-generational input, other kids of different ages around. That's a far more natural human, what we need as little animals, but that's not what we're providing. And I think that's part of the, if we're talking about, the little T, big T thing, it's, one of the sort of many little T's that we are having to deal with, which comes up. You've had the work of Gabor Mate, I'm sure.
Yeah.
He talked about this a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying also, like, I really want to dive into that with the podcast as well. I want to dive into a little bit more like conscious parenting, and also like something that is coming up also with the work within this organization called Sacred Sons, which sweater I'm wearing here. Not, wanting to advertise that like consciously. I just put it on because I was laying here, but basically this work what we are doing now with men, men's work, it's all about remembering. That's all we do. Like, it's not like we reinvent the wheel or reinvent anything. We remember, first of all, who we are and where we are coming from, and then along with that comes, that's always what I'm saying, also with the whole sort of like, with all sort of like very vogue and modern movements. I'm just like, all I'm saying is just like, in my personal opinion and experience, if we were all sort of doing practices that get us more into the now, into the body, into connected to the elements, many questions would be answered. Like, there wouldn't be also a huge need for as much regulation, as much so like restraining things. And I don't know, it would just not be possible, because honestly, if, for example, with 300 men getting up with the sunrise and doing primal activation and embodiment practices, if you leave that space after, me personally, I don't have any questions of how to deal with or how to behave towards a woman, for example, or towards elders, or towards weaker people in society, because it literally comes from within, that I treat people with respect, I treat people with dignity, with humility towards nature, that I don't pollute things. And I don't
Yeah.
know, it's just like, I don't have to read anything and nobody has to tell me. Like, it literally is all here, you know?
Yes. Yes.
So,
I think that is a very beautiful comment, because I think that's very true. Actually, in some ways, it's when we stop reading. And actually then the wisdom comes, if that makes sense. And I'm an avid reader, but then there are times where or maybe it's just periods when you just allow stuff to bubble up.
mm,
And then quite often you'll go back to a book and it's oh, that has explained it really well. You know how that sort of happens, where you kind of, I have an idea, something has percolated up, and then, for some reason you pick that book, don't you? And you open it on that page and you go, oh, thank you for explaining that really nice 20 words.
yeah,
Whatever,
but usually it's the other way around, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Oh, wow. That was That was a lovely little twist here at the end. I fairly enjoyed that very much. And yeah, so just taking a brief moment to, deeply express my gratitude for you and this conversation. It's like I say, it surprises me again and again, and also to be very honest, like with this particular conversation, I didn't have as much ammunition that I can get back to other than my gut feeling and my intuition of like this, exchange between you and I being a fruitful one, and trusting in that. And I was not disappointed, just very much the opposite and the contrary. And I'm ever so in deep gratitude about that, and about what you just shared with us today about your journey and how open and vulnerable you were. And I wanted to honor that. So thank you so much, Tamsin, for that. Like, I deeply
Thank you
appreciate
very
that.
much. Thank you, and thank you for giving, to opening up this space for us to have a chance to have this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there any place you want to point people towards when interested in working with you? Is there something specific?
Well, I mean, there's my website, which is somatic.works, and
Right.
that's the easiest way to find me if people want to. Yeah.
And to come to London.
Huh?
And to be in London, right? You're located in London.
London or online? Oh, well,
Or online.
obviously not for Rolfing. Not for Rolfing,
Yeah.
of course.
Absolutely. That's beautiful.
But yeah, SE is available.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. Deeply
Thank you.
appreciate you.
Thank you for doing this work. It's wonderful.
Hey, beautiful listener, you have made it all the way through. And I want to take a moment to say thank you. And you can do me an enormous favor. It's all I'm going to ever ask from you. And that is to go to your podcast app right now. And if you enjoyed the episode, give the podcast a 5-star rating. If you want to write 1-2 words or sentences, even more powerful, even better. Thank you, already in advance. And also, while you're at it, just click on that follow button, on that bell notification, so that you never miss a new episode. All of that just contributes, and it helps me to increase the reach of the podcast. That means I can attract bigger guests, and that means I can deliver more powerful episodes. So it's a tiny thing. I'm only gonna ask this little favor of you ever, not more. 10-15 seconds of your time, a couple of clicks, that's it. Makes a huge difference for me as a creator. So thank you so much.